Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over one of the most important concepts in all of chess, and that is opposition and outflanking. If you understand these concepts, your in-game tactics, strategy, and overall win rate will go up significantly. So I'm going to go over what these are, how it actually applies, and then I'm going to show you some examples from actual games so you can see how you can apply this to your own matches. This video is brought to you by Brilliant. More from them later in the video. So first thing we have to look at is what is opposition. Now, one side is said to have opposition if they're on the same file or row as their opponent's king. In this case, both kings are on the same file. And white's said to have opposition if, when they move, there's an odd number of squares between the two kings. In this example, there's 5 squares between the two kings. So white has the opposition in this example. All that means is the black king is never going to be able to get past this white king, even if they try to outflank, which we'll get to later in this video. Now, if we come back one move, instead of king to a2, if white played king to b2, now black would have the opposition because they can play king to b8. And now we can see that black moved, and now there's an odd number of squares between the two kings. So just that one subtle move from white can change who has the opposition. So let's come back and break this down a little bit more. Let's say that the white king wanted to make its way to one of these 3 squares. That's the game. You could play this by yourself, against yourself. You could play with a buddy. But your goal is to try to get the king to one of these 3 squares. If you do, you successfully win the challenge. Black is trying to keep you from this. So this all comes down to, can you find the opposition for your side? So we look from white's standpoint. Let's say that they try to choose the fastest path. And they say, well, I'm just going to make a beeline here. And we're going to go king to b2. And we're going to just keep going down this diagonal right here. But we already talked about and said black now has the opposition. They can go king b8. Well, let's say white continues and they play king c3 here. Well, from black's perspective, really, they should play king to c7. The reason they should play king to c7 is once you have the opposition, your opponent can never take it back if you play correctly. But black needs to make sure that when they move their king, there's an odd number of squares between the kings. And let's see why that's important. Let's say that white continues. If they move along the side and they play king to d3, well, black can just play king d7, maintain, they're still on the same file, maintain 3 squares, an odd number between the two. Now, if white doesn't play laterally here with king to d3, what if they come up to d4? Well, now black can play king d6. Remember, every time they move, they want to maintain an odd number of squares. They could also come back to d8, more of a trolling move from their opponent. It would do the exact same thing, but this is more forceful because now there's only 1 square in between, which is an odd number. And now, how does white continue? Remember, white's trying to get up to one of these 3 squares up here, the f8, g8, or h8 square. But they can't come to e5, so they can't come to the diagonal that they want to. They can't come to d5 or c5, so they're going to be forced to come to either one of these squares, e4 or c4, potentially. But if they go to either one of these, you can see black is just going to come e6, or if they go to c4, then they can go to c6. And yes, white could also just come back. So if they come e3, well, now black can even push them down even further and play king e5. Remember, they have to, when they move, stay on the same file and maintain an odd number of squares in between. Because black has now the opposition, white can never regain that if black plays correctly. And because of that, that means that white is never able to get past the black king and is never going to be able to get to one of these 3 squares and win this competition. Okay, so let's come back to our competition and see how white, if they play correctly, how they can win. And then we'll take a look at how you can apply this to your own chess games to make sure that you use opposition, outflanking to win more in the endgame. So white's trying to get to the f8, g8, or h8 squares. So the first thing when white moves is they have to make sure they have the opposition. We already looked at king to b2 is not going to win because now black has the opposition with king to b8. There are 5 squares between them. White really needs to play the move king a2. That's that first example we looked at. There's an odd number of squares between them, so white has the opposition. Now let's say that black plays king b8. Now we have to be careful. White does not want to play king to b3 here because black can play king b7 and they would have the opposition. There's 3 squares between them. So that would be a mistake. So if black plays king to b8, because hey, they're thinking, hey, I'm just going to move my way over here. That's not going to work out for them. White needs to play king b2. Now we'll continue down the board here. If they play c8, we play king c2 and continue all the way down the board. Now, if they play king g8, we're going to play king g2. But here's the difference. If they play king h8, we're going to come to king f3. Black is not able, although we came up 1 square, black is not able to play king f7 and get opposition. Okay, so that's not going to work for black. Maybe they play king g7 here. Remember, white had the opposition from the beginning. They can still maintain it. So now we can play king g3, still maintaining an odd number of squares between the 2 kings, exactly what white needs to do. And now, how does black continue? Okay, well, maybe king to f7. Now we can come to king to h4. And it doesn't matter which side they go. We're now starting to outflank our opponent. Now they may come back to g6, but now we can play king g4. One, we've kept them from ever getting past us, but now we're using the opposition to force our opponent to move, and then we're able to outflank our opponent and get to our outcome of f8, g8, or h8. So how does black continue from here? Maybe they play king to h6. Well, now we can outflank them and start moving on the f file. We can go king f5. Then we come back to g7. We're going to come g5 to maintain the odd number of squares in between our kings. It doesn't really matter where they go from here. They could come to f7 or h7. If they come to h7, we're not going to come to h8, but we can come up here to f8. Remember, we're just trying to come to any of these 3 squares. So if black plays king f7, we can just play king h6. They could come to g8, but that's fine. We come g6. We have the opposition still. There's 1 square in between, and now it does not matter where black goes. We are going to be able to outflank them and go around them. So they play king to f8. We can come up to king to h7, and then next move, king to h8. And if they play king h8, well, that's fine too. We can come king to f7, and we will reach our destination here with king to f8. So that's an overview of the concept. Quick word from our sponsor, Brilliant, and then we'll come back and look at this in practice so you can see how it actually plays out in your own games. Brilliant is the place to learn STEM hands-on. So it doesn't matter if you prefer science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. If you want to learn interactively, Brilliant is the place. Doesn't matter if you're like me and you grew up doing math competitions. This was a research I wish I had growing up because it's a really nice way to learn math and then apply that and see if you truly understand. You could be someone that's getting into computer science and you want to learn how to code, even at the building blocks to make sure that you have a good foundation. Or you could just like puzzles. You're watching these chess videos and you want to see, can I actually do some of the logic puzzles? Hopefully you can after watching the chess videos. But Brilliant is the place to go. And also, if you use my link in the description below, brilliant.org/thechess website, they're giving the first 200 people 20% off an annual premium subscription. So definitely check that out. I think you guys will really enjoy this website. And now back to chess. Let's take what we've learned and apply it to a real world example. King versus king and pawn is pretty common in chess. And in this case, it's white's move, and if white plays correctly, they should win. Now, the only way for them to win is to promote this pawn here on e8 to a rook and a queen, and then go on to checkmate their opponent. I have another video if you're curious how to checkmate with a king and a king and a queen, or a king and a rook. But right now, we're just going to go over how they can ensure that they can push forward. Now, hopefully, you remember everything we just talked about from an opposition standpoint, but you have to start thinking about the additional pieces that you have in play. Because if you look at this and say, okay, well, it's white's move, and white needs to play king to d5 to get the opposition. This is true. That is a true statement. They do have opposition on the black king, but anytime they move their pawn, they're going to lose the opposition. So instead, what white needs to do is think about the fact that their pawn is going to move, and how can they play accordingly? Well, the first thing they can do is play king to e5. Now, that is going to give black the opposition here with king e7 because there's one square, an odd number in between them, but now white has pawn e4. That forces the black king to move, and now white is going to get the opposition back. Let's say we have king d7. Okay, well, you can see now we can outflank black. Yes, we can play king d5 here, and if they were to come back to e5, we're essentially just waiting for them to come to d7. And once they come to d7, it allows us now to play king f6. We're now starting to outflank our opponent, and there's no way for them to stop it. Now, if they play king e6, or excuse me, king e8, okay, well, now we need to go back to the oppositions we talked about before. We're not really outflanking them anymore. We need to come back to center with king e6. We have opposition because we've moved, and there's one square between the two kings on the same file. And now where do they go? Let's say they play king d8. Well, now we can outflank our opponent with king f7 here. And there's no way for them to stop the pawn pushing forward. So they play king d7. They can't come to any of these e squares on e8, 7, or 6. And so we can start to push up our pawn here. And then eventually we're going to promote our pawn, and they're not going to be able to stop. So king to, or pawn to e8 and promote to a queen. So it's always important to understand what opposition is, ultimately trying to outflank our opponent, but you also have to take into consideration the additional material you have, in this case, a pawn that we're going to be moving as well. So you take the original concept and you start to build on it, and then you become a deadly weapon that you will not lose games, and you will find yourself in opportunities where your opponent should win, but they don't quite understand, you do, and you can end up drawing a lot of the games that you would have lost before. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video on opposition and outflanking. I think it's just an incredible tool that you should have for your chess endgames. Thank you again to our sponsor, Brilliant. Reminder, if you want 20% off an annual premium subscription, you can click on the link below, brilliant.org/thechesswebsite. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.